and welcome to another exciting show. Live from Barbados, and we've got His Excellency El Presidente, Sir John Hamer from Barbados, and of course myself, His Royal Highness Eric von Essex from the independent country of Rockham Hall. Now, tonight we're going to speak about Bill, because there seems to be a bit of a problem with Bill. Now, you're probably thinking the Bill that I'm talking about, or John's going to talk about, is, hang on, is he coming up? This character, of the Bill and Menopausal Psychotic Foundation. But no, we're going to talk about Bill Shakespeare, or William, his friends. Now, I've actually been to Bill's house in Stratford-upon-Avon. I haven't been inside because it was a tourist rip-off. But when I did visit it, there was some Japanese tourists around there. And one of the Japanese tourists came up to me and said, "Excuse me, can you tell me the way to the public toilet, please?" Now, that is an interesting thought, that in 1941, the Japanese could find their way to Pearl Harbor, but nowadays they can't find their way to the Kazi. Now, instead of going into Bill's house, I actually decided to go to the ye olde fish and chippy shop, where Bill Shakespeare apparently got his cod pieces from. Now, you're probably wondering why the illustrations have Bill Shakespeare going like that. Well, let's face it, if you've got some fish that's been fried in red hot fat and you push that down the front of your trousers, you would be going like that. But when I went in there, you see, they run out of cod, so I had to have a haddock piece instead of a cod piece. And I assure you, I did not shove it down the front of my trousers. I ate it with the chips, the ye olde chips and that. Well, apparently he used to go in there. So they told me. I mean, you've got to believe them, haven't you? Anyway, without more ado, we're going to look at to be or not to be. That is the question. So can everybody out there lend us your ears? Far away, John.
Well, thank you for that, Chris. You are an absolute lunatic, I have to say. But nevertheless, you're a very nice lunatic.
Thank you.
So thank you for that stunning introduction. Yeah, as you say, we're going to talk about Mr. Bill Shakespeare. And what a show we've got tonight. Again, I mean, this is yet another cover-up, psyop, whatever you want to call it. It took a little bit of digging beneath the surface to come to the conclusions that I came to. But I think you might all find this quite intriguing. And unlike things like the NASA thing that we did, the flat Earth thing that we did, this is actually a story. So it does have a beginning, a middle, and an ending, unlike the NASA and flat Earth kind of format, where it was just a series of facts and we could stop it at any point. And when it was getting too long, it's not possible to do it with this. So I'm going to have to try and be as concise as I can, because once again, as with the Jack the Ripper, it's quite a long and convoluted story. But I'm sure we'll cope somehow. Okay, so without further ado, let's carry on. Yeah, I think it's fair to say to begin with that against the premise that the actor William Shakespeare was not the man who wrote the works attributed to him is almost the entire elite literary and historical establishment. Of course, as with everything else, whose vested interest in protecting the knowledge that's been the received wisdom for over 400 years is obvious. I mean, should it ever be proven that Shakespeare was not the author of those works, those wonderful, wonderful works, then the entire bedrock of academic orthodoxy would be shaken to its very foundations by this revelation. And as we see in so many other areas of elite orthodoxy, the real truth would mean the entire house of cards crashing down upon the heads of its upholders. So just to whet your appetites a little bit there. I mean, as with everything else, just questioning the authorship of Shakespeare's works is enough to engender extreme hostility from the establishment, as we see with so many other lies and falsehoods that we're always told by them. Anyway, let's start at the beginning, shall we? I always find it's a great place to start. But yeah, who was this character known as William Shakespeare, and what was his story? It's amazing, really, that for someone as famous, even in that time period, as Shakespeare, hardly anything at all is known about the man. But as most folk do know, Shakespeare was born in Stratford-upon-Avon in the year 1564, in the early years of the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, and he was a contemporary of people like Sir Walter Raleigh, Sir Francis Drake, and the literary genius Christopher Marlowe, who we shall hear much more of later in this story. But for someone of such apparent great stature in the literary world, Shakespeare, well, almost nothing's known about Shakespeare's life. It's actually quite incredible how little we do know, or not just us. I'm speaking generally. I mean, the whole of the literary establishment knows very, very little about his life. We do know that he was the son of a glover, a glove maker, in other words, named John Shakespeare, and a lady by the name of Mary Arden, and that he had about 7 siblings, again, whom nothing is known of them. And he married a lady called Anne Hathaway in 1582 at the tender age of 18. But despite claims that he definitely attended King Edward VI Grammar School in Stratford, this is actually pure conjecture because the school records from that period don't survive anyway. And from his marriage at the age of 18 until his sudden appearance on the London acting scene more than 10 years later, nothing at all, absolutely zero, is recorded of him or known about his actions or whereabouts. And it's also quite intriguing that during his assumed 25 years of living in London, with as many as 8 addresses quoted in a range of different sources, he is never once recorded in church attendance lists, even though church attendance at that time was compulsory and had to be recorded by law. Okay, so it was illegal not to attend church in those days. And the origins of Shakespeare's career as an actor are also very debatable. For example, we don't know where or with which company he first became an actor and writer, but from 1592 onwards, his life in London suddenly just become a little clearer. His early fame came through history plays. The first one he wrote was a trilogy on the War of the Roses. And then by the end of 1592, he'd supposedly written the sequel, Richard III. His first definite address, though, is documented as Bishopsgate in tax records, in which he does appear. And he is thought to have lived there from 1592, maybe earlier. Okay, so at that point, I'll take a little break. And I think, let's do some chat, Chris, because I can see it's building up again already very quickly.
Well, we got a comedian in the chat room who says what we got. We got Jeremy Dodger says William Shakespeare was Jack the Ripper. The only trouble is a couple of 100 years apart from each other, so I very much doubt it. And Evening Cat Helmsworth, if music be the food of love, play on. And we've got Evening Folks as Ralph.
Evening, Ralph.
We've got here Bacon and Friends. I think Ralph has actually jumped ahead there. Was it Francis Bacon? So that's something.
Francis Bacon is one of the protagonists, but we only mentioned him very briefly.
He's being Danish rational Bacon. No, sorry. And Kevin Keener. Yeah, I know what you mean. Testing times we're living it. That's right. Now, this is an interesting one from Dan MC. It's the European royals who are actors playing the parts of all the big players. Soros, Gates, Rothschild, Rockefeller, I think we're coming into the 21st century here, etc., are all played by royals, hence the tragic deaths and new narratives created. Got to get my head around that one.
Interesting. Don't know. Yeah.
No, and we carry on as Dan MC. FB page called Royal Actors Destroy Humanity. Check it out. They are trained from birth. Multiple languages and accents, unlimited resources and tech. That's how it's all coordinated. They are family.
Wow, it's a pretty broad
That's
statement, that
interesting.
Don.
Yeah, we'll have to have about that. And he was saying, this is Jobby Dodger. Sorry, I was going to say Jammy Dodger. Bit like Jesus, when he was talking about William Shakespeare, his parts of his life, we don't know anything about.
Very
And
true, that, Jobby. Yeah.
Yes, only joshing lads.
Never mind. Yeah, we understand, mate. Don't worry.
This is DJB2. I'm guessing this is about the shake and bake idea.
Okay. Right.
Right.
All right.
Now, there's a few more. We've got our regulars in. We got Peter. We've got Sean. Good evening, Sean, in the chat room.
Hi,
and he said, hello, Chris, as Peter. Well, yeah, I said hello to him. And if there's anybody else, we got Louise. We almost missed you out, Louise. Sorry. Hello, all. A little late. Okay, no lines this week, but blame screw you because of late notification. Well, I don't think they like me, and I don't think they'll like us after do one of our naughty programs that we dare not put on. Screw YouTube. Anyway, that's it for chat.
Yeah, I must press on because it's a long story. Sorry to disappoint everyone, but it's a long story, so I'm going to need to cover it. Okay.
Right.
Now, yeah. So as I was saying, church attendance at that time was compulsory and had to be recorded by law, but there are no records of old Willie in there. Yeah. So we know that he lived in Bishopsgate, apparently, from 1592, possibly earlier. Now, Shakespeare's supposed rival, Christopher Marlowe, Kit Marlowe, as he was called, was allegedly murdered in May 1593, not too far out. And this event, possibly significantly, but we'll see, marks the point in time at which Shakespeare's almost overnight success began. Now, the idea that Shakespeare's work was not actually written by him, Mr. Shakespeare, of course, is not a modern idea. For years, there's been lots of intrigue surrounding the masterpieces that he allegedly wrote. But of course, in any situation where views are polarized on any particular topic, the actual facts in all cases should be examined thoroughly. And that's what I intend to do tonight before jumping to wild, unsubstantiated conclusions. So let's press on a little more. Now, Shakespeare not writing the works attributed to him seems, on the face of it, ridiculous and unbelievable. How and why would that be the case? What would the point of it? But as with every other lie from history, the question needs to be asked as to what would be the motive behind such a deception. Surely must defy any kind of logic. But Shakespeare doubters are by no means cranks, or so-called conspiracy nuts like all of us. They number amongst them such well-respected folk as Sir John Gielgud, Mark Twain, Charles Dickens, Henry James, Walt Whitman, Daphne du Maurier, and Uncle Tom Cobley and all, to name just a small selection. You know, their view was, and quite correctly, that there is definitely a real authorship issue. I mean, for starters, there's a total lack of evidence in historical records that a man by the name of William Shakespeare, who became known as the Bard of Stratford, was ever a writer. I mean, the only positive identification between the man himself and the works bearing his name came posthumously, as noted by a guy called Sir Hugh Trevor Roper. And I quote, "Of all the immortal geniuses of literature, none is personally so elusive as William Shakespeare. It's exasperating and almost incredible that he should be so. After all, he lived in the full daylight of the English Renaissance in the well-documented reigns of Elizabeth and James I. Since his death, and particularly in the last century, he's been subjected to the greatest battery of organized research that has ever been directed upon a single person. Armies of scholars, formidably equipped, have examined all the documents that could possibly contain at least a mention of Shakespeare's name. 1/100th of this labour applied to any one of his insignificant contemporaries will be sufficient to produce a substantial biography. So, what my research revealed about the man is that it's fairly certain that he was an actor. Okay, he was a shareholder in a theatre. He was also recorded as a tax defaulter, very naughty, a malt dealer, even a moneylender, a landlord, and as well as being a litigant in a court case, but a very mean husband and father. However, there is absolutely no existing evidence connecting him, no matter how tenuously, with any form of writing, let alone indicating that he was the greatest dramatist that ever lived. If a psychologist were to undertake a psychological profile of the man, he would no doubt declare him to be a most undistinguished and ordinary person, totally removed from the image anyone would expect of a so-called genius who created the magnificent works that bear his name. There's so much incongruity, shall we say, surrounding the life of this extremely mysterious character. As I've said, there are no known records of the education of Shakespeare in existence. In fact, on the contrary, it's known for certain that he did not attend university and left no trace whatsoever of a school education of any kind, let alone a grammar school education, as is claimed. I mean, he came from a very humble background. A grammar school in those days would have been extremely expensive and only really for the offspring of very wealthy families, of which he was obviously not. But it's also extremely unusual that he didn't leave a single manuscript of even one of his plays or poems in his own handwriting, and nor is there any evidence at all that he ever wrote a single piece of correspondence, i.e. letters to family, etc. So all in all, it's extremely odd indeed. And it's also very surprising to learn that both of Shakespeare's parents were illiterate, as was his daughter, Judith, who could only sign her name with a virtually undecipherable mark. I mean, we need to ask ourselves here, would a profoundly intelligent, educated and enlightened person, such as whoever must have written those wonderful masterpieces, as he allegedly did, treat his children in such a way, even a girl child? You know, was he perhaps of the view that the education of girls was a waste of time? I mean, that doesn't really fit the picture of his supposed character at all. Again, which is very odd. And it's also extremely clear from what we do know of him that even very basic literary competence or a tradition of education even was not a priority in any way for his family. And yet, in spite of this, Shakespeare was apparently immensely well read and worldly wise in an age where information was not instantly available as it is today to those who wish to access it. At that time, books were a rare commodity to which no one but the wealthy and privileged had access. And significantly, Shakespeare's will makes no mention at all of any books, nor of any of his literary works, whose value, even at that time, must have been absolutely immense. Okay, I'll take another break at that point and see that the messages are building up again, so we'll try and keep up to them as best we can.
Well, actually, if I'd like to come here, this story is parallel. I did many years ago, I did a radio interview with the late, great Robert Newman. Not the Robert Newman that's famous, but there was another Robert Newman. And he did the Mozart myth. He was a music historian.
Yes,
and he discovered what he discovered was virtually identical to what you're saying. Mozart was just ordinary. His music was written by other people, but it was the Austro-Hungarian Empire lost so many wars. They wanted to look great. They wanted to look good. So what do? Turn Vienna into the city of music to boost the empire up. But when you look at Mozart, his music, I love Mozart's music along with Wagner, but you notice that it's very, very different. Whereas you listen to Wagner's music, who I think was a genius, it's similar right the way through. We listen to Mozart, but I'm going off track there. But this story is almost identical to the Mozart myth. So we just have I just thought I'd mention that. Now we've got some quite interesting ones in the chat at the moment. We've got Jobby Dodger, and I'm sorry if I mispronounce and say Jammy Dodger, but it's a Jobby Dodger. Isn't there a film that alludes to the fact that Shakespeare wasn't Shakespeare? I don't know.
Yeah, there is. Yeah. There is. Put it again underneath. Anonymous. It's called Anonymous. Yeah, he's right. Yeah.
Yes.
As always with these things, these mainstream things, though, that's a bit of a whitewash, actually. But yeah, it does exist, the film. It is quite amusing. Quite worth watching.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. So do you have, this is Kat, do you have any actual ideas of who did write the works? I think we're going to come
Wait for it, Kat. Wait for it.
Was it written by him? No, I wrote it, actually. You know, I sort of went back in time. Now, here we go. It says, alas, this is repeated. Alas, poor, can I do a Sir John Gilbert? Alas, poor Shakespeare, for we know who wroteth these works. Sorry, we know not who wroteth these words. Well, do you know something? I don't think I'd ever get a job in the theatre somehow, do you?
No. In a word, Chris, no.
No.
Just being honest.
Now, it says here, one dies, another appears on the stage of life. No such thing as coincidence in this world. You're mentioning the words of the late, great David Starbuck, who sadly passed away last November. I heard the other week. So he was a good mate of mine, Dave Starbuck. And we've got Sebastian Moran. That's very kind. Great show once again, chaps. Thank you very much.
Sebastian. Thank you.
And we got Aunt Sally. Evening, peeps. Henceforth, I am lurking with thee.
Lurk away, Aunt Sally. Lurk away.
Oh, that's a better one, wasn't it? I think, you know, get the old pantyhose on and stand on the stage, you know.
Not a pretty sight.
Not a pretty sight. What do all the blokes cross-dress in those days in Shakespeare's stage? It's funny, that, isn't it? And wear a piece of
fish. They didn't have any female actors in those days, Chris. They were all the female parts played by men.
The only time I've been very cross is when I accidentally put two feet down one trouser leg, you know. I think that's called cross-dressing, isn't it? You know, bloody hell. Anyway, this is Louise. The elite all come from one interbred bloodline. Yes, that is correct. So that's very, very interesting. Now, where we got down? We got here. We got here. Dan MC. The only elites and billionaires are the royals. The rest is all fiction. Do you really think they would let non-blood relatives become billionaires? The world is but a stage for sure.
So you're quite keen on this theme, Dan, I noticed. Yeah.
Yes. And we've got here Aunt Sally. Begone, Shakespeare, thy name is sullied evermore. It's got here Kevin Keener. Wendy Shakespeare, great dancers. Is she? Never heard of her. Oh, well. That's it.
Thanks, Kevin.
That's interesting. So I do hope you like my Sir John Gilgood impersonation.
Brilliant.
Crap, isn't I? Anyway, over to you, John. This is fascinating.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, well, it gets even better. Yeah. Bear with it. Okay. Right. Also, significantly, of the 6, and there are only 6, alleged surviving signatures of Shakespeare, only 2 are generally regarded by graphologists as being made by the same person. So again, there's a lot of kind of falsification going on there. A lady by the name of Jane Cox said in a book called Shakespeare in the Public Records, which was published in 1985, she said about the signatures, and I quote, "It is obvious at a glance that these signatures, with the exception of the last 2, are not the signatures of the same man. Almost every letter in each is formed in a completely different way. So the plot it doth thicken." Yeah, so was the so-called greatest writer in all history so intellectually and manually challenged that he was barely able to write his own name. Another significant fact is that Shakespeare appeared to be almost senile by 1612 when he was only 48. His deposition to a court case in that year revealed him to be very, very confused and incapable of expressing himself except in a very basic and very crude English. Hardly what you'd expect, really, of the greatest writer of all time, I would suggest. And another massive anomaly is that his death passed entirely unnoticed and without any form of recognition whatsoever. No one even bothered to acknowledge it, let alone pay him any tributes. There was no state funeral, as there has been for less well-known contemporaries such as Ben Jonson, Francis Beaumont, Edmund Spenser. I mean, Beaumont died a few months before Shakespeare and received a huge tribute, lots of huge tributes, whereas all Shakespeare got was a deafening silence. I mean, who today, other than devotees of English literature, has even heard of Francis Beaumont? I mean, I certainly hadn't until I began researching Shakespeare about 12 years ago. In fact, his departure from life was just as mysterious as his sudden appearance upon the scene in 1593, a couple of weeks after the death of Christopher Marlowe. And I'll return to this theme again very soon. But so this new to the scene writer from the backwaters of rural Warwickshire also managed to disguise his regional background so cleverly, and what must have been an ear-splitting Midlands accent and dialect to the refined souls of the capital, as to provoke no comments whatsoever from them. But also significantly, I believe, not once does his use of language in writing ever betray that strong rural dialect he must surely have spoken with, given the geography of his upbringing and the simplicity of it as well. As I said, he came from a very, very ordinary poor family. But Shakespeare's work actually indicates strongly that whoever it was who wrote it, it was someone totally at ease with the intellectual and social elite of the day, and definitely not a lower class country bumpkin, which, given his background and the age in which he lived, would almost certainly have been the impression it would have conveyed to his London contemporaries. People who are highly gifted individuals as well, such as whoever wrote Shakespeare's works were, naturally attract attention and praise wherever they go, whereas Shakespeare most certainly didn't. In fact, he was all but anonymous apart from in name. And I would also point out that his works demonstrate an incredibly detailed knowledge of geography, history, the classics, international politics, diplomacy, and significantly a first-hand experience of Italian culture and customs, as in such works as Merchant of Venice, Two Gentlemen of Verona, Romeo and Juliet, as well as a great intellect too. However, despite this, his only friends would appear to have been lowly actors and theatre people, and there's no evidence whatsoever linking him to the intelligentsia of the day. I mean, in those days as well, it's worth pointing out that actors were not regarded as heroes and celebrities in the way they are today. They were just generally regarded as lowlifes and degenerates, which is really how most of those today work for the powers of darkness should also be viewed, in my view, which is pretty ironic, but there you go. So anyway, despite his alleged intellectual capacity, was he just simply a boring non-entity of a man, as his lack of publicity at the time would seem to imply? You know, the strange lack of connection that he had with the literary hierarchy at the time is compounded by the curiously self-deprecating way in which he refers to himself throughout his sonnets. To whom were the sonnets addressed and dedicated, and to what events in the life of their author do they refer? Absolutely nothing that's known of Shakespeare seems to fit the person alluded to in the sonnets at all. Okay, do you want to take a break again, Chris?
Certainly. There's some interesting ones in chat. It really, it's what we got here. What we got now. Louise Wilcox Did he get syphilis? No, I think he preferred wine. I'm a tea drinker myself. Sorry. I don't know. Did he get syphilis?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
No,
Certainly not recorded.
Nothing clap about it. So here we go. This is Jobby Dodger says, he's R.I.P. Methinks young knave.
Okay.
So John Gilcott must be turning in his grave now. Now we got. He probably did, Louis Wilcox. That's about his syphilis. Edward Dan MC says Edward of Kent is Jacob Rothschild. I think it's a slightly different subject there. I don't think Rothschilds. I think they might have been around then, weren't they? Well, none of the Rothschilds in those days. Right, we've got here. Emin is verily Shakespeare must have had ye jab in like manner to his anonymous antecedents.
Antecedent, yeah, absolutely, Emin. Yeah, I mean, I think for anyone who's not picked up on the reference there, I think Emin's referring to the guy who was allegedly the first man to take the COVID thingy.
Yeah,
that was demonstrated, and who allegedly and not unsurprisingly died shortly afterwards, I believe.
Well, slap my thigh. What a surprise. That's clever. That really is, isn't it, Kevin? That really, I won't put that. Sean, hello, Sean. Sean Haber. No relation to John. To be or not to be, that is the question. Or it to have been or to not have been. Yes. Says here. I'm sorry. Many a young fellow lost his mind to the illness of the ladies of the night. Yes, that's right. We're still on about syphilis, I think, there. I won't tell you the nun joke. That's a disgusting one. Anyway, about the crater syphilis. Anyway, I am pondering, this is Aunt Sully, why whoever did write Shakespeare's works will give it away to nobody. Got to be sinister reasons afoot. Well, I think we're probably coming to that. And we got Louise. Actors are the powers of darkness. Back then, they were people who couldn't get a proper job, so resorted to the stage.
Yep.
Yes, and also I think that women actors were not looked on as prostitutes, weren't they? You know, it was the lowest of the low that a woman could do. I think it was lower than a prostitute to go, be an actress. Yes, and
I got one. You missed one out, Chris. You missed one out.
What we got here? Peter, John Hamer. Anita says hi. She's actually watching with me. Hello.
Isn't it your bedtime yet?
I got antecedents and descendant mixed up. Never mind.
Well,
but never mind. Poetic license. Well, we all make mistakes. That's why they put erasers on the end of pencils, isn't it? And I might say the nun's joke. Do you don't know? Because you chance it, I might be booted off for it, or a little bit later.
Live a little dangerously, Chris. Go on.
They go into Mother Superior and say, "We've got a case of syphilis." Mother Superior says, "Oh, I hope it's that better than that Beaujolais Nouveau that we had last year." Sorry. Whoa, baby truther channel.
Bless the baby.
Evan, what's changed? Actors and actresses are all sellouts, so effectively prostitutes. Yeah. In a way. Methinks you're into something there. This is Aunt Sally. Then
we missed 1 2 back, Chris. I think that's what she's referring to.
Oh yes, that's right.
I presume she's a she. I'm not sure.
This is Peter. All the world is a stage. All the men and women merely actors. Probably the most truthful thing the author ever said. Whoever he was, maybe 'twas a woman.
No, it wasn't.
You never know. Women didn't really do much in those days. Then we've got here players. Oh yes, it made a mistake there. Paul Green. What do you think of the theory Mary Sidney wrote the plays?
Well, I'll tell you what,
Mary
Paul,
Sidney,
when I've finished, you tell me what you think of the theory that Mary Sidney wrote the plays. Is it a deal? Okay. I honestly don't know. I'm just teasing you, mate. I honestly don't know that.
Jobby Dodger, I'm not fluent to my dismay, Aunt Shelley.
This show's getting very silly now.
It is. Anyone noticed that Mother Teresa was a dude? Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't know on that one. Thing not at that very time. Right, this is Louise we've got here. Prostitution is an honest job. They give you pay for what they get. Fair trade. It's the oldest profession in the world.
Thanks, Louise.
And do you know what the second oldest profession in the world is? You'll be quite surprised. Public health. Seriously, it is. Right, so B thinks.
Yeah.
Go on to.
Okay, so so
John.
just to repeat what I said last time I was talking, was that nothing that's known of Shakespeare seems to fit the person that has been alluded to in the sonnets at all. In fact, sonnets number 71 to 76 are the ones in which the composer's identity is most strongly revealed. These compositions repeatedly make reference to their real author's name, and more significantly to the actual danger of it being revealed. I hope this is now beginning to be a little bit more intriguing. And I'm just teasing, but I am going to come on to the meat of it very, very soon. The only evidence that we have linking the actor Shakespeare to the writer Shakespeare is also virtually non-existent. And it's mainly for this reason that attempts have been made to assign an alternate identity to the writer from that of the actor. Now, the threat, one or two people have mentioned this, these names, but the three most common names in the frame are Francis Bacon, Robert de Vere, aka the Earl of Oxford, and Christopher Marlowe. Those are the main three that are attributed to him. But they would all, at first glance, appear to have serious drawbacks and strong reasons to suggest that they're incorrect. Francis Bacon definitely did not have the literary acumen and skill that Shakespeare's works would have needed. The Earl of Oxford, likewise, would be disqualified on similar grounds. And also, more significantly, with the Earl of Oxford, who otherwise would probably have been the prime candidate, was that he died significantly in 1604, which was well before the final works were written. We know for certain that they were written after 1604, and the literary style is consistent throughout the entire body of work. So I do believe that actually rules out the Earl of Oxford. Now, Kit Marlowe, on the other hand, would certainly have had the education. He certainly had the literary track record. He certainly got the writing skills and life experiences to have written them. But the problem with this assumption is that as Marlowe was murdered in 1593, which was just before Shakespeare came on the scene, that would seem at first glance to rule out that particular possibility. So where does that leave us? A complete dead end, it would seem. But maybe not. In 1994, there was a lady historian called Dolly Raitt who argued strongly and with quite a lot of evidence that Christopher Marlowe did not, in fact, die in 1593, as has been widely claimed, but that his alleged murder in May of that year was staged to enable him to escape his imminent arrest, torture, and execution on the grounds of his well-known atheistic views. Because, as I said before, atheism was illegal. You had to attend church. To not attend church was against the law. Blah blah blah. Now, according to Raitt's theory, after 1593, Marlowe went into voluntary exile in France and Italy, significantly, but according to her again, he continued to write this literature under the pseudonym of William Shakespeare, which he apparently plucked out of thin air. And it just so happened that there was an actor in London at that time whose name was also William Shakespeare. Now, Kit Marlowe was absolutely a literary genius. I mean, there's no question about it. and if fate hadn't intervened in the form of his being murdered, in the form of his being persecuted by the fundamental Christianity that was rife throughout society at that time, it may well have been he who was regarded as the bard and the greatest literary icon that ever lived, rather than the man who now bears that title. From 1587 until his alleged death in 1593, he was the author of a series of brilliant literary works to rival even the best that Shakespeare himself could manage. There had been nothing in literature to challenge that superiority before, and only Shakespeare since has been remotely comparable to the genius that was Marlowe, really. Marlowe's biographer, Dr. John Bakeless, commented actually that Shakespeare's work is replete with references to and quotations from Marlowe's work, whilst almost entirely ignoring his other literary contemporaries. There are numerous comparisons between the two, and even contemporary literary critics were often known to have confused the works of both on occasion, such was this stylistic similarity. And a guy called Sir Sidney Lee actually commented that, and I quote, "All the blank verse in Shakespeare's early plays bears the stamp of Marlowe's inspiration." And the 20th century literary critic Edward Dowden believed, along with many other literary experts, that in terms of ability, Marlowe was at least Shakespeare's equal. And he said, if Marlowe had lived longer and accomplished the work that lay clearly before him, he would have stood beside Shakespeare. It's very significant. And another significant point is that a number of Shakespeare's early plays were, until recently, erroneously attributed to Marlowe. And there's almost a seamless transition from Marlowe's final work to the first one attributed to Shakespeare. Marlowe allegedly died on the 30th of May, 1593, and Shakespeare, totally coincidentally, of course, published his first work 2 weeks later, with the publication of the poem Venus and Adonis. A literary scholar by the name of Arthur Aitchison noted, and I quote again, "No atom of proof exists to show that previous to the publication of Venus and Adonis, Shakespeare had done any serious literary work at all." Okay, so again, if you want to go to chat, Chris, I'm ready for another drink of water.
It all adds up, doesn't it?
Yeah, it gets better. It gets better. Stick with it.
Well, you think about it. You are part of the establishment in Elizabethan times, and there's this person who's an atheist that you want to get rid of, but he's done some absolute work of genius, and you want to put Britain on the stage. Oh, we are great in that. You don't let it die. You just say, oh, it's attributed to some plonker who was just an ordinary actor.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it does. But with chat, I think they've somehow the plot has been lost because they've gone on to Mother Teresa for some unknown reason.
Oh, right,
What to do with Shakespeare, I don't really know. I don't think
really have time. We don't really have time to kind of go into that stuff.
No, we won't go into that.
I'm sorry, guys, but yeah, I've still got a lot to cover. Believe it or not, this is just phenomenal stuff coming up now. That's going to blow your mind a little bit. So,
well, we might do a future program on Mother Teresa. Let's put it that way. Okay. Right. So we got Justin Withers, 2 of the best on YouTube right here. Oh, isn't that kind? Thank you, Justin. That's very kind of you.
Much appreciated.
And now we got what's this? Lenny Henry, more honourable than Lenny Henry at all. Shilling for the agenda. Oh, blimey, yeah. Oh, Lenny, don't talk to me about him. Right. You missed the comment from Jobby Dodger that reckons that the oldie-worldy English speaky chap type will F up the nasty algorithms and not censoreth thee. I like that answer, Sally. Now, it says here, oh no, we're going on to Mother Teresa again. We've got Queen Anne of Romania played. Right, John.
I think we skip all this stuff, Chris, and I'll press on because we've still got a lot to cover, mate. That's all right.
Righto. I hope you don't. Please don't take offence if I don't say about Mother Teresa, because that's another subject. thinks, was it Alexandra War thinks Edward de Vere.
Yeah, a lot of people do, Emma, and it is a common thing. But as I said earlier, Edward de Vere, who was otherwise known as the Earl of Oxford, he didn't have the literary acumen that other possible people had, such as Marlowe. So I'd like to press on if I may.
Well, just this last one, Peter, John, have to admit, in your falsification of history book, you make a very compelling case for Marlowe, though I know you're not too sure about that at the moment. I don't know. I think you're.
I just want people to make up their own minds, Pete. Now, if I may continue.
Righto.
Thank you. All right. Okay. So now, as I said, a number of Shakespeare early plays were until recently attributed to Marlowe, and there's like a seamless transition from Marlowe's last work to the first one attributed to Shakespeare. Now, there is a poem that exists that was written by Marlowe called Hero and Leander, which is a Greek tragedy, basically about the two Greek characters, Hero and Leander. Then this poem actually seems to be a prequel to Shakespeare's first work, as Shakespeare's first work explicitly refers back to it, and this was entered in the Stationer's Register on the 18th of April, 1593, without author, but it's believed to be Shakespeare. Okay. Now, the printed version appearing in June contained a Sorry about that. I've got a severe case of COVID going on outside the window. I hope you didn't hear the sirens there. Anyway, sorry. So it contained a dedication and an authorial attribution on a page that had been separately printed and interleaved with the main text as though it was an afterthought. This was definitely not normal practice in literature, and it's not the way that Shakespeare's subsequent work was produced, which was called The Rape of Lucretia. It's totally incredible and surely no coincidence that the circumstances around Marlowe's demise, which we'll come on to very shortly, and Shakespeare's rise from obscurity dovetail extremely neatly together. And again, I shall come on to this. But it's utterly overwhelming circumstantial evidence, I would suggest, and I hope you'll all agree with me when we actually hit that point. Okay. Now, there are several ways that we can determine common authorship of literary works. There's a subjective method where someone reads it and says, "Oh yes, I believe that's so-and-so's work," or alternatively, there's a more objective statistical method. One technique of which is to monitor the distribution curve of words and word types so as to produce a kind of a fingerprint for each individual writing style. This then provides a comparison with others. And this method was devised by a very respected physicist, Thomas Mendenhall, at the turn of the 19th into the 20th century. Now, Mendenhall was very interested in identifying the authorship of Shakespeare's works, not for reasons of proving any particular pet theory. He just simply wanted to apply his own methodology to an area of popular interest, and he just happened to choose this one. So he gathered, bear in mind this is over 100 years ago, he gathered a team of researchers together who began counting the more than 2 million words in Shakespeare's work, plus those of his contemporaries, which was obviously a bloody huge task in the days before computing. And the results of the project, which took a fair old whack of time, they were pretty well unambiguous. The resulting comparisons between Shakespeare and Bacon were entirely different, as were the ones produced for Johnson, Beaumont, Fletcher, and also the Earl of Oxford. However, when the distribution word curves of Marlowe and Shakespeare were compared, the results were absolutely astonishing. And Mendenhall was absolutely gobsmacked, to use a popular idiom. He said, and I quote, something akin to a sensation was produced among those engaged in the work. In the characteristic curve of his plays, Marlowe agrees with Shakespeare about as well as Shakespeare agrees with himself. Now, as I said, it's more than 100 years since Mendenhall's project, and his methodology has since been totally perfected. Two guys, Louis Yule and John Baker, updated Mendenhall's work using computer technology to analyze both word length frequency distribution and the pace of new word uptake in both Shakespeare's and Marlowe's works. And based on analysis of every single piece of work known to have been produced by these two authors, Yule and Baker determined beyond reasonable doubt that they were statistically indistinguishable from one another. So, it's more than apparent that Marlowe was capable of producing Shakespeare's works. But perhaps a more appropriate question may well be, who else besides Marlowe would have had the ability and the wherewithal to do so? In fact, the answer to that is really no one. No one else would seem to fit the bill, pardon the pun, at all. But perhaps, a more important issue to address at this point will be the fact that Marlowe was apparently murdered in 1593. And so how could he possibly...
Probably wasn't.
Well, how could he possibly have written, if he was, how could he possibly have written the works attributed to the Bard of Stratford? And this is where the plot seriously thickens. So, are we right?
We've got some
any more non-Mother Teresa chat bits?
Peter has got a good one here. Could it be that the mystery surrounding Shakespeare's identity might actually be some kind of code or reference used by secret societies? Perhaps Shakespeare is actually a code word esoterically. Now that is interesting, because you mentioned Marlowe. There was a detective series in the 1960s called Marlowe, wasn't there? Or was it 70s? I don't know.
Philip Marlowe, yeah, it was.
Yeah. Then we got here Paul Green. Now we go back to Mary Sidney. I've never heard of her. I don't know who she is. It says here, got the Mary Sidney theory from Adrian Gilbert's book. Oh yeah, I know Adrian Gilbert. I know of him. Know him. I read years ago. Forgot his exact reasoning, but remember she had the education and was well connected, but it's just a theory about women.
Okay, Paul. Yeah, interesting. Maybe at the end you can give us your opinion on what you think about what I'm saying this evening, because I feel that it's pretty damning, the evidence, as we'll see very shortly.
Hence Shakespeare never been seen as he would have been recognised as Marlowe. This is from Louise. And I like it. Siren you heard earlier was no, John. That siren is you hear is the fearmongers. Yeah, I like that.
Strangely enough, just as a little aside, Louise, and everybody else, of course, not just Louise. The last week, I've seen so many ambulances with their blue lights and sirens going, and none without. And I'm just wondering, actually, whether all paramedics, ambulance driver paramedics, have been told to drive around with their sirens and blue lights on wherever they go, even if they're not doing any urgent work. It just made me wonder, for obvious reasons, which I won't go into.
I can back you up on that. I can totally back you up on that, because I walked a fair long way from where I live to this Tesco superstore, which has a huge car park and a ring road going around it. And I was around about this time last year, possibly a little earlier, I saw an ambulance with its lights flashing and everything going around the ring road, parking in the car park for a while, and then going around the ring road again and parking the car park for a while, going nowhere. Yeah. And I know this because I was walking there, and I didn't go by car that day. If I'd have gone by car, I wouldn't have noticed it. And I thought, this isn't strange.
Just building up the fear, I believe.
It's the fear agenda, and it really shook me. And there's a police car there as well. The cop was just sitting in there looking bored stiff. So what was this ambulance doing, going round and round and round in a circle? It's red, blue lights flashing. So there is something weird going on there,
There's a anyway, comment as well. There's a comment by Cat as well.
A Cat, where are we?
It's a bit further down there. So.
had these sirening ambulances all over Portugal too. Think they are under globalist orders to convince us.
I wouldn't be
Yes,
at all surprised, Kat. I would not be at all surprised.
that's right. And it's the build-up in the hospitals of the, yes, intoxicated. We have it here every day at school pickup times. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's
Right.
go back to Shakespeare.
Yeah,
Shall
still
we?
loads to cover, so I'm gonna really try and power on quickly now.
Okay. And please apologise
Okay.
if I have read everybody's comment out. Please don't take it
Yeah.
personally. We're trying to cram it
Absolutely,
as much as possible.
absolutely. Time is of the
So,
essence.
okay, John, fire away.
Right. Okay, so to continue with the story, 10 days prior to Marlowe's alleged death on the 30th of May, 1593, he had been arrested on a warrant from the Star Chamber on a charge of atheism, which was a serious crime in those days. Now, the Star Chamber, as some people may know, was a kind of pseudo court which was established to ensure enforcement of laws against prominent people as opposed to ordinary people. You know, those so powerful that ordinary courts could never convict them of their crimes because of the corruption that was going on then, just as much as it goes on today. You know, court sessions were held in secret, no indictments, no right to appeal, no jury of peers, no witnesses. And over the years, it kind of evolved into a political weapon, a symbol of the misuse and abuse of power by the English establishment and judiciary, which continues to this day, as I said. Indeed, Star Chambers now become a byword for today for a corrupt court. But from the first day of his trial, Marlowe had in effect been out on bail and had to appear before the court on a daily basis, whilst in the meantime evidence against him was being collated by his informers. He'd been under suspicion of atheism for quite some time prior to his arrest, being a known member of something called the School of Night, who openly discussed taboo issues of the day, just as we do today, such as the accuracy of the Bible, etc. And in those days, it was if something was stated in the Bible, such as, for example, Methuselah living to the age of 963 or whatever it was, then that's exactly what happened. It was not up for question or debate, and anyone offering a contradictory opinion was an atheist, pure and simple, and the penalty for atheism was torture and horrible death, with no exceptions. So Marlowe was under great pressure. Now, his play, one of his plays, Tamburlaine, was also under serious suspicion of exhibiting atheistic ideas. And so, of course, as the author is totally responsible for the contents of any of his works of literature, no matter how brilliant that work may be, then again, it was all, pointing to Marlowe's guilt. And just to put the tin lid on it for Marlowe, he had a contemporary, Robert Greene, who actually hated him. And he actually wrote he hated him because he was probably a medieval homophobe. Marlowe was known to be a homosexual, a very overt homosexual, should we say. He didn't make any bones about it. So that was something else that didn't go down that well in those days. Okay, so Robert Greene actually wrote a scathing accusation of atheism directed at Marlowe, and this almost certainly contributed to the severe difficulties that Marlowe found himself in. Then, in early 1593, an author and friend of Marlowe by the name of Thomas Kidd was found to be in possession of a copy of a heretical piece of prose, which earned him a spell on the rack, and all this agony associated with that experience. Under that horrific torture, he implicated Marlowe in the writing of the piece and explained that it must have somehow become mixed up with his own papers in some way by accident. And this statement was enough to cause the arrest of Marlowe. And his previously far from perfect past meant that he would potentially be in far greater danger than the relative small fry of Thomas Kidd. So Marlowe's friends, I believe, decided to make a plan to save him from almost certain death at the hands of the torturers. And this would mean his complete disappearance in one form or another. Now, fortunately for Marlowe, he had two very influential Elizabethans as his friends. These were Lord Burleigh and Sir Thomas Walsingham, because Marlowe came from a upper class background, and so he was hobnobbing with these people. And in fact, Walsingham was Marlowe's patron, and it was at Walsingham's house in Kent where Marlowe was staying at the time of his arrest. And Walsingham and Marlowe, is where the plot thickens again. They were both employed as intelligence agents in what was in effect a forerunner of today's MI5 and MI6. And as
Wow.
such, they were well acquainted with covert operations and intrigue, a fact which would become extremely important as far as Marlowe was concerned. Now, the murder itself was a very strange event indeed. It involved three men, all of whom were known to Marlowe, and all of whom had worked under Walsingham, and all of whom were well versed in espionage tactics. In fact, if you're going to pick a team with which to pull off this plot, then these would certainly have been extremely strong candidates. Their names were Robert Poley, Nicholas Skeers, and Walsingham's private secretary, Ingram Fraser. And they were all loyal to Walsingham and highly skilled in the art of deception. And even the location of the murder seems to have been carefully chosen. It was in Deptford in Kent, in the house and grounds of a lady by the name of Dame Eleanor Bull, who was a very well-respected lady at the time. She was a widow, and she was also the cousin of the Queen's nanny, Blanche Parry. It had very secluded grounds, which meant no unwanted onlookers, and just three plotters plus Marlowe. This created a perfect environment for a setup of that kind. The only witnesses being the aforementioned three, and these were almost certainly acting under the orders of Walsingham himself. Now, Deptford was also a great venue for the deception. Firstly, it was a port in its own right, with regular sailings to the European mainland, which would have been perfect for Marlowe's swift getaway out of the country. Secondly, Marlowe was unknown there, and so any inquest jury would not have been easily able to identify the corpse in those pre-photographic days. And thirdly, the most well-known and prominent inhabitant of the town was the Lord Admiral, who was patron of Marlowe's own theatre company. Isn't it funny how it all comes together? Now, Dolly Raitt, the aforementioned historian I talked about, who actually postulated this idea in the first place, also believed that there could have been strong reasons for believing that Queen Elizabeth herself may have been complicit in the plot. Obviously, Walsingham and her were on, good terms. They knew each other very well, and he was obviously a highly regarded and trusted loyal subject to her. He also knew that her pet hate was being deceived, and he may well have felt uneasy that had he not confided in her, harm may befall himself too. But he also knew that she enjoyed a little bit of subterfuge and intrigue herself. Indeed, would the Queen have been happy to see England's most foremost literary figure, as he was at that time, tortured and executed, given her well-known love of literature and the theatre, and the fact that she certainly had no time for religious fundamentalism or fanaticism in any form? So, to the incident itself. On the 30th of May, 1593, as I keep repeating, I got it right this time at least, Marlowe and his three friends spent 8 hours together at Dame Eleanor's house. The subjects under discussion could only be guessed at. We don't know what those were, but it's certainly an unusual way to spend the day alone with your three murderers-to-be. In the evening, they were having supper together when an argument started regarding the bill, which in those days was known as the reckoning. And then we're led to believe this argument, so-called argument, continued all the way back to the doorstep of their host. And at that point, Marlowe was fatally stabbed by Fraser above the right eye, allegedly in self-defense. Of course, it's a common occurrence, isn't it? Groups of friends often get into fatal arguments over something as trivial as a bill, especially wealthy men as these all were, and for whom it must have cost a few pennies at most. It seems a bit suspicious to me anyway. But anyway, this was the story they told after the fatal event, and also the one that's gone down in history as the reason for the untimely demise of Marlowe. And Fraser himself allegedly received a small nick to his head, just serious enough to prove the alibi of self-defense, but not serious enough to cause any lasting damage. And Marlowe's wound was very strange. According to forensic science, it's physically impossible to push a knife through the skull just above the eye socket, without using absolutely inordinate force.
Mm.
If a wound did occur in that region, it would have to have been made by an axe or a pickaxe or another heavy implement. To try and force a dagger through the skull bone at that point would need absolutely immense strength. It would also be almost impossible to create a wound like that in what was in effect a brief hand-to-hand tussle, or so they said. It seems more likely that the wound was designed to create a gory mess of the face rather than anything else, which would obviously then hinder identification. Anyway, 2 days later, the inquest took place, and this was presided over solely by a guy called Danby, who was the Queen's coroner, who it turns out had no jurisdiction whatsoever to act alone, especially in Deptford, because it was outside his area of jurisdiction. But he was, even if he had got involved, it was legally bound to perform his duties alongside the local coroner, which of course didn't happen. So again, it all smells very fishy. And that, in effect, should have nullified any decision made by that illegal inquest. The decision of the coroner, based solely on the testimonies of the three stooges, Poley, Skeers and Fraser, was that Fraser had acted in self-defence and therefore wasn't guilty of murder. Stop me if you've heard this kind of story before. Ha ha ha.
Yes.
Yeah. The corpse was immediately buried in an unmarked grave in Deptford, and that was a strange event in itself, for the body of an extremely wealthy and famous young man to be just disposed of in that manner. It just didn't make any sense at all. Okay, so I'll stop for a little while, have a breather and another glass of water. I'm trying to charge on a little bit now because it's
I know what you mean. I think people are so fascinated they're not putting much in comment, because it is fascinating and it really does look like a put up job. What I'm interested in is what happened to the so-called murderer. But first, let's have a look at what Louise Wilcox has said. Old school atheists, like Thomas Paine was an atheist, are modern day conspiracy theorists. Absolutely. How dare we question what we are told? Absolutely. That is correct. That is correct. I mean, I get sick of being labelled, you're a conspiracy theorist, you're one of these cranks, aren't you? Believe that Elvis lives on the moon. Well, that's ridiculous, because Elvis works in our local supermarket alongside Roy Orbison.
I thought you worked in the chip shop.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, is that his Saturday job?
That's his Saturday job. Yeah. But anyway, that is back to Shakespeare or Bill or to his mates. Deptford, that would be the perfect place, wouldn't it? So, absolutely. But okay, I'm interested in what happened to the so-called murderer.
Shall I carry on a bit then?
Please do. Yeah.
Okay, right. So, we're coming to that, Chris. A bit more background, first of all, to the relationship between Walsingham, Marlowe, and the three protagonists. As I said earlier, Walsingham was a prominent member of the Elizabethan Secret Security Services network, which was overseen by a guy called John Dee, who many people have probably heard of.
007.
Yeah, and he was well known to be a practitioner of the dark arts of magic with a K on the end and Satanism, and was suspected of being an adept exponent of early attempts at mind control. And a lot of researchers believe that the writing of Shakespeare's works was in fact a form of mind control in itself. And if so, I haven't looked into that element of it, but it's something I might do actually at some point. But if it is, that adds further credence to the case for Marlowe being the author of the said works, as it's beyond doubt that he was involved with the intelligence services in a major way. Also, at this time, Francis Bacon, one of the main suspects in the debate about the authorship of Shakespeare's work, wrote his treatise, The New Atlantis, whilst hundreds of privateers, pirates to you and I, amongst whom the most prominent was Sir Francis Drake, were in the process of plundering the seas of all the loot they could obtain in order to swell the coffers of the crown. In the meantime, Sir Walter Raleigh and his ilk were already preparing the colonies in Virginia for the mass immigration to come 30 or so years later. And through the British East India Company, corporatism and later consumerism was already beginning to establish a foothold in Britain and was soon to be emulated by the rest of the civilized world. So these three men, the one that we mentioned, Fraser and Scares, Fraser, and Poley, I beg your pardon, who were pillars of the, or pillars, I'm not sure, of the Elizabethan establishment, were also the main proponents of Rosicrucianism, which constitutes the mystery teachings of Babylon, which is obviously passed down through the bloodline families, and which is soon to become what we know today as Freemasonry. Surprise, surprise, surprise. And all these men knew that their real history, or they knew their real history, and were deeply involved in such subjects as ritual magic, again with a K on the end, and were fully conversant in esoteric ancient knowledge. So this group of people, this brotherhood, if you will, were the original architects of the New World Order we see developing today. They were instrumental in establishing London as the New Jerusalem, and also as the banking capital of the world later that century, and the ancient bloodlines whose origin can obviously be traced back through all the preceding ancient civilizations, way back into the mist of time. However, I'm digressing slightly. So back to the plot. Another interesting twist to this really convoluted tale was that in 1601, the Queen seemed to be well aware of who was the real author of Shakespeare's work. Now, just before the Essex Rebellion, which took place in that year, the conspirators of the Essex Rebellion, not the conspirators of Marlowe's death, commissioned a performance of a play called Richard II, in the belief that this would incite the audience to support, or at least condone, a coup against Elizabeth, as had been the case in the play in question, because Richard II was the monarch at the time of the Peasants' Revolt. So that's the connection there. So she knew what was going on, and it absolutely enraged her. And not surprisingly, she was said to have exclaimed very, very angrily, "I am Richard II, know ye not that?" And she also directed that the following tirade at the play's author, who we believe to be Shakespeare, but who I believe she knew was Marlowe. She said, and this is very significant, please take notice of this, she said, "He that will forget God will also forget his benefactors. This tragedy was played 40 times in open streets and houses." I mean, that comment could only have referred to Marlowe. He that will forget God, Marlowe, the known atheist, would forget his benefactors, the Queen, who helped expedite the plot and the subsequent cover-up. She was absolutely his benefactor. Because if she'd believed that Richard II had been written by Shakespeare and not Marlowe, he would, without a doubt, at the very least, have been arrested and warned, if not much, much worse. So, let's next look at the evidence presented, yet hidden in plain sight, in the form of Shakespeare's plays and sonnets. And this is quite interesting. Now, the sonnets paint quite a vivid picture of their author, and this picture is definitely not one of a struggling actor. They do, however, accurately describe Kit Marlowe, his life and alleged death, almost perfectly. In sonnet number 74, there is the following line: "My body being dead, the coward conquest of a wretch's knife." And also, "But be contented when that fell arrest without all bail shall carry me away. My life hath in this line some interest." Here, Shakespeare refers to his own arrest and bail. There's no record at all of Shakespeare ever having been arrested and bailed, but that's obviously not the case with Marlowe. And in sonnet number 72, "My name be buried where my body is, and live no more to shame nor me nor you." In sonnet 50, there's a vivid description of the author's journey into exile. Again, see how closely this fits Marlowe's life and yet bears no resemblance to Shakespeare. How heavy, sorry, I need to move a bit closer, I can't read. So, "How heavy do I journey on the way, then what I seek my weary travels end, doth teach that ease and that repose to say, thus far the miles are measured from thy friend. The beast that bears me, tired with my woe, plods duly on to bear that weight in me, as if by some instinct the wretch did know his rider loved not speed, being made from thee. The bloody spur cannot provoke him on, that sometimes anger thrusts into his hide, which heavily he answered with a groan, more sharp to me than spurring to his side. For that some same groan doth put this in my mind, my grief lies onward and my joy behind. And that is actually him telling of his journey into exile, I believe. He's talking about how heavy his heart was when he was riding that horse into his intended destination after fleeing on the ship from Deptford. I believe that's what that refers to. Okay, and there's lots of other references. I don't want to go into lots and lots of detail, but I'll just mention very briefly sonnets 25, 33, 34, and 36 also extensively refer to the author's name having fallen into great disgrace and strongly bemoan that fate. If Shakespeare's name had ever become embroiled in any kind of scandal or infamy, then it would almost certainly have been public knowledge, but it isn't. And it would have been recorded by someone somewhere, and it wasn't. That fact that it wasn't speaks volumes. And in the play As You Like It, again, I'm just picking out odd ones here. There are many, many more in all Shakespeare's work. But in As You Like It, the character Touchstone says, when a man's verses cannot be understood, nor a man's good wit seconded by the forward child understanding, it strikes a man more dead than a great reckoning in a little room. Truly, I wish the gods had made thee poetical. Right. Well, this is surely referring to Marlowe's alleged demise over the bill, the reckoning, as it was called in Elizabethan times. And he says that it was nothing compared to the continual agony of having to write in disguise and having someone else take all the credit for it. That is precisely what it's saying. Now, I can't really do justice to all the scores of examples of Shakespeare texts where oblique references are made to Marlowe, including anagrams of his name, etc., and protestations of his suffering in exile and his innocence. It's clear that Marlowe was desperate to take credit for his own genius, and who wouldn't be? And he left so many obvious clues as he dare in his great works. So, in conclusion, I believe the Shakespeare story is just another classical example of the distortion of history. It's just another small piece of the jigsaw puzzle that makes up the ongoing grand conspiracy against humanity. It also provides us a good example of how 4 or 5 prominent people working together in complicity can completely fool not just the entire literary establishment, but almost the whole of humanity for more than 4 centuries. And it provides us with yet another case of how unbelievably simple it is to falsify events to benefit the 1%.
That is brilliant, John. It really is. And Paul Green, let's take the words out of my mouth. Your conclusion sounds logical enough to me. He's taken enough to make exactly the same, because I've really learned a heck of a lot tonight. Robert Newman, he looked into Shakespeare myth, and I'll have to listen to the program again, but I got a bit lost halfway through. He was a very technical man. You've told it in a way which is clear, you understand.
Okay.
And we'll never know how long Marlowe lived in France for.
Italy,
we will never know. Sorry?
I think he ultimately went to Italy, Chris, because that's where, if you notice, a lot of Shakespeare's plays are based in Italy. And, well, certainly 3 or 4 anyway. The major plays are based in Italy. So I suspect he actually went to Italy and he wrote with using his first-hand knowledge of Italian society and Italian customs.
Yeah. I mean, Shakespeare would have known. He came from a sort of like ignorant peasants, really, and
he did.
He was probably barely literate, if that.
Yeah, I don't think he was literate. And in fact, some graphologists have said that signature looks like it's done by a man who's learned how to write his own name. Doesn't have any knowledge of how to write as such the language. Just learned how to write his name because it's written in a very shaky, uncertain hand, as though he's practiced copying it off a piece of paper.
Yes,
that's what some graphologists said about his signatures.
That is incredible. And again, Louise has taken some words out of my mouth. awesome, John. Thank you. So easy to comprehend. That the last three words sum it up. The late great Robert Newman did a fantastic. Really, he went at real depth. But you've explained it, John, in a way that we can all, understand it. And I mean, it just seems so obvious. And also, I mean, I don't know, was homosexuality in those days? I thought it was in the Victorian times. It was a bit sort of was frowned upon.
No, it was anti-religious. It was regarded as kind of heresy. Yeah.
Yeah. So that would have nailed it as well.
Yeah.
But that is yeah. And then of course you got Thomas Paine 200 years later, who was a very famous atheist. But yeah. But I suppose you could be an atheist and get away with it in France, could you? I suppose. I don't know.
Maybe. I honestly don't know that, Chris.
No, I don't know. Yeah. But well, because I know that Guy Fawkes tried to get away to France, didn't he? He tried to leg it because it was a Catholic country.
Yeah. But that was a psyop as well, the gunpowder plot. We'll have to do that sometime as well, because that was just a total psyop.
Well, they knew it was going to happen, didn't they? But
yeah,
again, although we're around the same sort of area.
They knew because they organised it. It was the establishment that organised it. I won't say why, because we may cover it one day, and yeah. But
that is. I'll just read out a few more, if I may.
Yeah.
It's got here. Ninja Man shares the same name as the first guy to take in the UK. Yeah, it seems to be a sort of establishment name, doesn't it? Because it's a very unusual name. The whole world is a stage. Well, personally, I think the whole world is a lunatic asylum, and we've got the front row seat. At the moment, it is. Great show, Chris and John. That's Ralph Winter.
Thanks, Ralph.
Says Sean Hamer. Atheism is a religion. Anyway, yes, it is.
Correct.
The Soviet Union was said to be atheist, and it was people just worshipped Stalin, and well, most of them didn't, but they were forced to worship Stalin. But yes, that is incredible. And then we've got here Barry Wickens. As we delve deeper into research, the world has been creating lies and deception from day one. You've got a very, very good point there, Barry. Very good point. Yes, because but it's so close, what you were saying, John, to the Mozart myth. Very close. For example, they got one of Mozart's compositions and they put an infrared camera or whatever onto it, and you can see somebody else's signature underneath and Mozart's signature over the top.
Yeah.
And I wonder what would happen if they looked at so-called, well, we all know it's Marlowe now. I mean, some people say it's Francis Bacon, but I think Marlowe, that definitely ticks all the boxes. Deptford.
I definitely think it was Marlowe, yeah.
But I mean, did his murderer get away, or was he put on a rack and killed?
Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention that, didn't I? Yeah.
Yes.
No, what happened was, which was really odd. Sorry, I should have included this, but I didn't put it in my notes. It was what should have happened was that he should have gone to jail, the murderer, immediately, not without trial, on the basis that, because this is what happened in Elizabethan time. If you killed somebody, even accidentally, you went straight to jail, okay? And then there was an investigation carried out, much like there is today. And then if you were found to be not guilty, you would be released. But what happened to him, he didn't even go to jail. And he didn't even lose his job as Walsingham's private secretary, which under normal circumstances he would have done, because Walsingham would not have been wanted to be associated with an incident of that kind. So actually nothing happened to Ingram Fraser whatsoever. He was just allowed to carry on his life, which is totally against what should have happened even in those days. So again, that speaks volumes, and yeah, that was a bit of a kind of an omission by me, for which I apologise. That's significant too, I believe.
If I can, is it John Gielgud? I mean, actually, I shouldn't say this. I don't. You must not. Was it speak ill of the dead? But he really was bad at. I didn't go much in his acting, but I think at the beginning of this, you mentioned that he didn't
Yeah,
believe that
he was a
Shakespeare.
detractor. I mean, a lot of these people who detract, they're only doing it on the basis that there is so little known about him, and they can't believe that such a working class guy as he was could produce works of literature like that, which is fair enough. Yeah, obviously he couldn't, but they never investigate as to who it really was, or the reasons why, or what the cover up was, or what the cover up was all about. They just know, very much like today. People know what's going on today is a load of utter bollocks, but they don't ask why. They don't really comprehend why, or that it's part of a much bigger plot. And it's similar with that, I believe. John Gielgud maybe doing the guy an injustice. Maybe he did look into it deeper, but they just know instinctively that something's not right, but they don't really look into it.
Well, they don't want to rock the boat, because once you go against the
absolutely.
establishment, because I've got this theory that a lot of people, not all, but majority of them, have become very, very mega famous, especially the ones that are not very talented. They seem to always stick up for the establishment in the end, and just think, it's a bit strange. I won't mention any names, but shall we say a pub pianist that's done good, and someone that can't act, but I won't say any more than that, shall we? And we've got here a very good point, Ninja Man. The winner always writes their history. That's right. The winner, was it the victor, always writes history. That's why French history books have got so many blank pages. And sorry about that. And
one of the 4 thinnest books in the world.
That's right.
The Italian book of war heroes. Yeah.
Right, we've got here Louise. Thank you, Chris and John, for another wonderful evening. This is very kind. Thank you. And thanks, chat, for the great conversation. Love you all. Gotta go. The kettle calleth me. Oh dear. Yes.
No sugar for me, Louise. Thanks. Yeah.
I'll have a biscuit, please. Everything was written in the 1600s, when no one could read or understand the scribes. That's Sean Haber. I think the scribes go back to biblical times, don't they? I don't know, but that's very interesting. I know
what it means.
Literacy,
it means that most people were illiterate in those days. Yeah.
Well, most people were illiterate in the Victorian times. It's only when we've gone up to what sort of Edwardian times that the literacy rate, we became more educated. And but the thing is that it's a double-edged sword, because they don't want you too educated, because you start thinking, hang on a minute, what's going on here? Right, now this is an interesting one from Barry Wickings. Hello, Barry. They say history is rewritten every 80. I've heard this one, yes. Every 80 years, when most people are dead. And then you can change the history stories to suit their agenda, and no one alive can verify their truth.
Yeah, interesting, Barry.
That is a real good, because I guess you've heard that one about America goes in 80-year cycles. Have you heard that one?
Yeah.
Which I'm sort of, I think things do go around in a cycle in a way, but that is interesting. Well, thanks, John, for joining me again. I've really I enjoy it every week, but this has been absolutely fascinating, because, you took it for granted. Oh, it's old Shakespeare, and when I was at school, we didn't do Shakespeare. If you mentioned Shakespeare to the kids, I think it's a new washing powder or something. What? Who's he? But I went to a good school. It was approved. But no, seriously, this has been fantastic. I'd like to thank everybody in chat. And again, I know I can't.
Thanks, everyone.
I'm sorry. I can't read everybody's comments out, but we read them through afterwards. So thank you so much. And please don't be insulted, because, we'd be here all night if I read them all out. So I just have to sort of pick and mix. So again, thank you very much for everybody. Now, next week, we've got an absolute cracker coming up. It's about Bigfoot. And we're going to have 2 people that have seen and heard him, her, or it. So
not me. I'll be here, but I'll be taking a back seat. Okay.
And also, plenty of people on the comments section, or one person in particular, has said, why not have the lady, what was her name now? I can't remember her name, who is runs the British Bigfoot.
Deborah, somebody, was it Deborah?
Harwell, is it Hanwell? Something like that.
Hartwell or something, I don't know, yeah.
But the thing is, it'd be too many people on that one show at a time. It just, 5 of us, it'd just be top heavy. So I think 4 is about the maximum we can really have. And John and myself will probably take a little bit of a back seat on that one, because the 2 people we have on have actually seen and heard this Bigfoot. But we might have her on at a later date as a backup for the UK edition of it, because these sightings were in America. But it's a fascinating subject. Also, we're planning 2 things: a naughty show, and the naughty show will be able to say things that we can't say on YouTube. And I like chat. I really like going backwards and forwards into chat, and I do enjoy live shows. Unfortunately, the naughty shows, we can't have chat, we can't have live, but I'm looking into it, and I hope I'll be able to find a way we can do it live. Obviously, we can't do it on YouTube or Facebook, because the klaxon horns will be ringing their headquarters, and they'll be like, boom, bang, boot off immediately. So we'll, always look on, as I say, our websites for the latest news, and they are, if you want to find out about John, it is, where are you, John? I've lost you. Your website. Hang on a minute. Here he is. It's the falsification of history.co.uk. Okay, and if you want to send a email to John, here is his Gmail. There we go. And of course, if anything happens where you don't see us on YouTube or anything like that, because we might have said a word wrong, and they might boot us off. The Fockham Hall, hang on, where are we? Fockham Hall is fockhamhallradio.com is the place to go, and you'll see the latest news on there. And work is still going ahead with the Fockham Hall Times, so that will come hopefully soon. And please join us, same time, same place, next week for a Bigfoot special program. And thank you very much for joining us tonight, John. And thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, Chris.
And remember, have a laugh. And good night.
Good night.